this presentation, we're going to talk about elements of the offence. With the elements of the offence, the facts in every case are different. The common denominator, however, is that the designated offence consists of individual elements. The elements that make up the offence must be proven by the prosecution beyond reasonable doubt, and this is a higher burden of proof than the civil burden of proof, being on the balance of probabilities. The elements of the offence become the facts in issue. They're the things that you have to really focus on in order to secure a successful prosecution in court. The logical starting point in regards to any offence, or the investigation of any offence, is to dissect the stated offence into individual elements. We must then proceed to obtain all the evidence, evidentiary facts, that relate to and prove each element. So you must get evidentiary facts or obtain evidentiary facts to prove the facts in issue, which are the elements. In nearly all matters, the onus is on the prosecution to prove the alleged offender committed the offence. Except in very few circumstances, the onus never shifts to the accused to establish his or her innocence. In some situations, there is a reverse onus. An example of that is being in possession of goods reasonably suspected of being stolen. If you find someone in possession of some expensive items who you reasonably suspect don't own or are not the owners of that property, one of the elements of the offence for theft is prove that the property was owned by someone. If you don't know who the owner is, you can't charge them with theft. So in this circumstance, they throw the onus back onto the accused to justify and explain that they are the owner, if they have a legitimate explanation for that, because you haven't got an owner to come forward and say, I owned that property and I didn't give that person permission to take it and keep it. What is meant by an offence? An offence is an act or omission which renders the person doing the act or making the omission liable to punishment. Offences are classified as either crimes, misdemeanours, summary offences. In some jurisdictions they're summary offences, indictable offences, serious indictable offences. Basically, offences are classified on the basis of penalty. Summary offences are usually offences where there is a monetary fine imposed on the person being found guilty. Indictable offences or misdemeanours are where you'll have a period of imprisonment up to 2 years imprisonment, for example, and that's the general guidelines in most jurisdictions. Serious indictable offences or serious crimes will be those offences where the penalties will be imprisonment for more than 2 years. Acts or omissions. The act is the doing of something that is prohibited by law. So stealing, fraud, unlicensed driving, that's the act. Omissions are failing to do something that is required by law. So failing to perform a duty, failing to wear a seatbelt, failing to stop at a stop sign, failing to lodge a tax return. With elements, the offence consists of both what they call physical elements and fault or mental elements. The physical elements will be conduct or result of conduct. The fault elements or the mental elements will be things like intention, knowledge, recklessness, negligence. In any crime, there are two components to the crime. Actus reus, the guilty act, and mens rea, the guilty mind. You must have both of those components to prove a crime. Summary offences, on the other hand, are slightly different in that they are what's called strict liability offences, where you don't have to prove any fault elements or the mens rea, the guilty mind, in regards to proving that offence at court. With fault elements, sometimes it is very difficult to prove intention, knowledge, recklessness or negligence, and you're relying on what the accused tells you or the suspect tells you during an interview. For example, how do you prove intention? Sometimes it is very difficult. Intention can be proved by what's called overt acts. If you observe a person for a period of time and they are very suspicious and they undertake actions that point towards what their clear intention is by circumstantial evidence. But generally, intention is proven by the person admitting what they were going to do. There may be different fault elements for different physical elements. There may be no fault element for one or more of the physical elements. If we look at an offence such as the fraudulent falsification of records, any person who with intent to defraud, that's a fault element. There may be a number of alternatives, A, B, C, D, E. Makes a false entry in any record, which is a physical act, or B, omits to make an entry in a record, or, which is an omission. C maybe gives any certificate or information that is false in a material particular. So again, physical act, or in any way falsifies, destroys, alters or damages any record, physical act again, or lastly, option E or paragraph E, produces or makes use of any record the person knows is false in any material particular. Produces or makes use of any record. So it's a physical act. The person knows is false in a material particular. So that's a fault element. And each of those are different crimes that can be committed within the one offence section. The meaning of words can be found in the Act itself, generally in Section 3, in the Dictionary of the Act, or what's termed the Dictionary of the Act. You have a series of definitions, and they will apply to the whole Act. In large or more complex pieces of legislation, you may have chapters, parts, divisions, or sections. You may also have definitions that relate just to a particular chapter, a particular part, a division, or a particular section in the Act, and those definitions will only apply to the chapter, part, division, or section. There is also in each jurisdiction an Acts Interpretation Act, which explains how legislation should be interpreted. If we look at a piece of legislation, and I'll use an example from a local council here in southeast Queensland, there is an offence for parking a heavy vehicle in a local government area for more than an hour, and that legislation is designed to stop people parking, or drivers parking, a large B-double truck in a small residential area while they are home for the weekend. Now, the definition of heavy vehicle is not contained within that piece of legislation in the local government local laws. It's actually referred to in one of the later schedules in that piece of legislation. And the definition of heavy vehicle is referred to and is the same as used in a piece of state legislation called the Transport Operations, Road Use and Management Act, 1995. And when we go to that Act, so you have to go from a local government piece of legislation to a state government piece of legislation to find out the definition or meaning of a word in a piece of legislation used at local government level. The vehicle in question, which is a heavy vehicle, there are 5 options. Logically, option A, or subparagraph A, is a vehicle with a gross vehicle mass of more than 4.5 tonne, which is logical, a large truck. Subparagraph B is a public passenger vehicle. That may be a bus, which fits the criteria for being a large vehicle, but a public passenger vehicle may also be a taxi. So it may be a smaller car. Subparagraph C says another vehicle providing services on a road for which a licence is required under the Transport Act. That may be a street sweeper or a forklift. Option D is a vehicle transporting dangerous goods for reward. That may be a four-wheel drive used to transport explosives to a mine site. Lastly, which is, I think, one of the most clumsiest subsections in any legislation that I've seen, it says a vehicle used for driver training or reward. So a heavy vehicle may be a vehicle used for driver training or reward. So that may be a small car used by a driving school. Or ludicrously, it may be a motorcycle used by a motorcycle rider training school. So in summary, you need to dissect the offence section of the legislation into its component elements. You need to check and confirm the meaning of words as they apply to the offence section, and you must be particularly vigilant in regards to such words as and or may, shall or must.